So I read 14 books in the month of January, which is a lot for me. And I think this is because most of them were novellas and I finally got a Kindle. I ended up continuing to read audiobooks, which I just started for the first time in December of 2023. The first thing I finished off was Paris, the memoir. In December, I had read the Britney Spears memoir, really enjoyed it. This was something that I did while doing dishes, while doing laundry. I am like now a new favorite lover of listening to audiobooks when I'm doing chores around my house. And this was entertaining and I enjoyed it for what it was. I like memoirs as audiobooks. This is like my new thing. It was interesting hearing Paris's perspective and the correctional camps that she went to and shedding light on that, which was interesting. I don't necessarily think this is like anything fantastic. I won't be rereading it. I won't be buying a book trophy. This was perfect for what it was, which was just something to keep me entertained while I was doing chores. Then I finished reading Ironside, which is the last book in Holly Black's modern fairy tale series, which I adore. I really, really like the world of Elfhame. I have a few more books to read from her that I've since picked up, and it's back again with the characters from the first modern fairy tale series, Tithe, which is interesting, kind of seeing like kind of their story full circle, and it does include the characters, some of the characters from Valiant, which is the second book, and I enjoyed it. I like going back there. It is a darker story a little bit than The Cruel Prince. The Cruel Prince is a better trilogy, but I do like this as a prequel and just getting back into that world, so I recommend it if you're interested in doing that, and I'm just enjoying reading Holly Black's like full repertoire of books. Then I read probably one of the worst books I've ever read in my life. I tried to do this video. I was like trying to read the most viral books on Book Talk, and I like couldn't handle it. I couldn't even film this video, and I read Penelope Douglas's Credence. This is my second time reading a dark romance. The first time was with Hooked last December, and I also like did not like that at all. Dark romance is like not for me. I'm not interested in reading about particularly faux pas romances, and I think this was advertised as like a reverse harem. It was mostly incestual. So Lexi Newly Nova did a fantastic video, which kind of wrecked her for having to reread this book twice and go as in depth as she needed to. But if you want to know about that book, just go watch that video. Don't even read the book. It's free on Kindle Unlimited. So I got excited and I just was like, oh yeah, sure, I'll read it. I regret that. It's not for me. And I think a lot of people, it's a book about like a young, lost, troubled girl, teenager. She's still in high school at the time that the book starts. Goes to move in with her uncle and her two cousins. Now, she didn't grow up with this part of the family. They were estranged. However, she begins a sexual relationship with all of them. And it's just the kind of taboo subject that I'm not necessarily interested in. Like, I didn't know how to even do that video. I thought the book was just like taboo for the sake of being taboo. It wasn't particularly well written. It wasn't this deep dive into the trauma of a situation like that. Like, these things happen, unfortunately, in real life, and it wasn't like any kind of exploration of, it was a romanticized version of this kind of pretty horrible thing that happened, and I don't necessarily like that, and I think it perpetuates bad relationships for people, and especially younger readers that are reading this stuff. Anyway, it's fine. You know, if you need to read it to get your socks off, that's completely fine. I feel like, I don't even know how to say this. It was just not for me. If I'm going to continue trying to find some dark romance, maybe there is one that I like. I might give dark fantasy romance maybe a little bit of a shot, and maybe that like division of, you know, fantasy between reality is going to be something that I enjoy. However, this definitely wasn't for me. Then I finished another audiobook, which is probably why I got through so many this month, but it is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. Now, I think this is fantastic. I thought I wouldn't want to read this because my mom passed away like a few years ago, and so I was like, oh, maybe I'll get triggered by it, but no, this is fascinating. She talks about the abuse that she endured from her mother as being a child actress, the behind the scenes of a lot of the situations that she was in as a child actress, and I'm not usually huge on celebrities, which is funny because I keep listening to celebrity memoirs on audio, and apparently I'm enjoying it. This is a great book. I think it was really well written. I actually think I would have enjoyed it even more if I listened or if I read the physical book. Now, I don't know anything about iCarly. I never grew up with it. I never like watched the show. I was too old for it when it was on Nickelodeon. It doesn't matter. You can still enjoy this book, and it's just interesting hearing her perspective, and I enjoyed the audio. I had heard someone recommend it, which is why I listened to it. Then I finally went back to the Throne of Glass series. Now, I'm just a basic, and I'm enjoying Throne of Glass as much as the next girl, and I finished Queen of Shadow, and I loved it. I thought it was awesome. I cannot wait to get into it. Now, the problem is I wasn't able to continue reading this series. I have tabbed my books, the next 2 books, getting ready to do the tandem read. However, I have been in San Francisco and those books are in Florida, and I didn't really like want to bring them with me while I'm here for a couple weeks. And so that's when the Kindle kind of came in handy. So I finished Queen of Shadow. I'm not really going to talk too much about the plot because it is, you know, the 5th or 6th book in this series, and I feel like it would give it away, but you're continuing to follow the main protagonist from the first one, and it's fascinating. It's great. I actually think as far as the Sarah J. Maas series that I've read, I read ACOTAR, and now I'm reading Throne of Glass, and I think I like this one even more, which I think a lot of people do. Then I finished Iron Flame. My sister-in-law was reading it, and I had just gotten her into reading fantasy, and she's actually now reading ACOTAR and is supposed to read Throne of Glass next. So I have to stay ahead of her, but anyway, so she was reading Iron Flame, and so I wanted to kind of buddy read it with her, and I finished it, and I enjoyed it. Honestly, I think it's the same thing as Fourth Wing. A lot of people didn't like it. I enjoyed it. A lot of people found, I think, Violet kind of irritating in it, but she was equally irritating in the first book. I still like the relationship. I like where it's gonna take it. I'm enjoying the world that she's kind of creating, and it's just fun. It's just a good time. It's like nothing, she's not rewriting anything. I mean, she's technically rewriting everything. She's like cut and copying good things from other fantasy series and like putting it together and regurgitating it in like a not necessarily the best way, but I'm enjoying it. Like, I'm having a good time. So, you know, and I'm not a fantasy connoisseur, so don't take that with a grain of salt. Now, I am currently filming a video that is like the top reads of Amazon and Goodreads of 2023. I'm in the middle of reading a bunch of those books, so I'll eventually have that video out. So I read Yellowface. I enjoyed it. I'm not going to go into too much detail. It is very fascinating, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it in that next video. Then I started to read some of my most anticipated fantasy series. I have been wanting to read Leigh Bardugo's Shadow and Bone forever. People talk about it all the time. This is kind of my year of essentially trying to rid myself of FOMO. There are so many books that I want to read this year, and I just need to start, like, you know, chipping away at them. And this is actually the only book that I have a physical copy of it here. I enjoyed this book. This is a pretty well-regarded YA fantasy series, and I found it entertaining, but also I enjoyed the TV show. And I think because I watched the TV show, this actually went a little bit slower for me, unfortunately, because I knew a lot of stuff that was going to happen. Now, the TV show, they intertwine the Shadow and Bone trilogy, which is the first trilogy that she wrote, with the duology of the Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. So the show blends both of them together. So there are characters that were in the TV show that I haven't met yet because I haven't gotten to the Six of Crows. This trilogy is about an orphan girl, Alina, and her best friend, Mal. It's told in the perspective of Alina. She's a map maker in the army, and they live in this world that is constantly at war. Hundreds of years ago, the Fold was created, which is this big vastness of darkness that essentially only death exists there. There's monsters, and like no life can survive. And however, everything that's in there is in theory allergic to light. And this is basically everything that's on the back, by the way. She ends up being taken into the Fold as a map maker, and her best friend and her love interest, she's had this crush on Mal since she was a child, and he doesn't necessarily reciprocate those feelings, but he gets attacked, and she gets so panicked that he's going to die that her power emerges. And it is a coming of age story, essentially, of her and her journey, realizing that she has the power of the sun that she can wield. She's called the Sun Summoner because she has a summoning power. I found Alina not particularly likable. She's a little bit annoying and a little bit naive and really insecure and constantly needs the validation of other people, which is why maybe I feel like people wouldn't like this, but I like the world. It's called the Grisha-verse. The magical people in this world are called Grisha, and they are part of the second army. The first army is like normal human beings, that like a normal military, and they are very much separated. And it's like set in this like pseudo-Russian Polish empire. Anyway, so the Fold, this like massive darkness, is what divides this country, Ravka, away from and like makes it impossible for them to trade. So it's pushed the entire country into extreme poverty. And so for the future of Ravka, they're like, okay, we're gonna, now that we have the Sun Summoner, we can take down the Fold. And so she kind of gets taken into this whole world. Anyway, this is the first in the trilogy that I finished. Next, I was on the plane, and I think I decided to read The Housemaid. I saw that it was available on Kindle Unlimited. I knew that The Housemaid's Secret was like really, really popular last year. This is not for me. I didn't find it, honestly, like I think I'm not that interested in domestic thrillers anymore. I had enjoyed Gone Girl and like a lot of those that were, you know, very, very popular years ago. However, this one, honestly, it was a little predictable in my opinion. It was a very quick read though, and so if you're maybe in a reading slump or something, this could be like a an interesting read. It's about a woman who has recently been let out of prison. She spent the majority of her years, like her young years. I think she got into prison when she was like 18 or something. Now she's like 28. She spent 10 years in prison. You don't know why. And then she starts working as a housemaid for a very wealthy family, for a woman, her husband, and their little girl. Anyway, I didn't find it particularly interesting. I think this is a trilogy is my understanding, or it's at least a series of some sort. And I am planning on reading the next one. Maybe it does get better. And my understanding is that it follows a completely different set of characters. Like the main character still exists, but it's a completely new story. Like the original ones are no longer in it. It's fine. It's okay. And then Amazon, I think, did this collaboration. It's called The Improbable Meet Cute, and they did it with a bunch of romance authors, and they're a series of short novellas. And this is really what stacked up my reading numbers for January. The first one I read was from Christina Lauren, which is actually the first Christina Lauren book I've ever read, and it was The Exception to the Rule. And I think the idea of this is that each author has essentially taken the improbable meet cute. So they figure out like something that's really unlikely to happen for two people to meet together and then create a short romance novella. And the three that I read 3 of them, by the way. None of them have any spice. So in case you were interested, but they're still really fun. They're quick reads. I had a great time, and I've been reading them in order. So Exception to the Rule is the first one. And I think this is my favorite one because it's like mixed media. A lot of emails were shared back and forth. Basically, the premise is that this girl receives an email. I think they're both teenagers at the time. Anyway, she receives an email from someone, and it's an accidental email. Like he thought that he was sending an email to his teacher. This is on Valentine's Day. And anyway, they go on essentially emailing each other only on Valentine's Day for about 10 years. And then so they kind of essentially become a constant in each other's lives, and then obviously one day they actually do meet up. And so I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. And then I read the second one, which is The Worst Wingman Ever. This one's really cute. It is a little bit more depressing. This one's by Abby Jimenez, who I really like. It is a hospice nurse, and unfortunately, she is helping her grandmother at the end of her life. She's the one leading the end of life care. She's in the parking lot of her grandmother's apartment, and she gets a note on her windshield when she goes back to her car on Valentine's Day, and it's like a weird Valentine for like one, free sexual favor, essentially. And then she ends up putting the note back and I think saying something like, this is, wrong car or whatever. And so it turns out that the main protagonist, the male protagonist, he was doing his brother a favor, and so he's going to visit his brother who lives in the same apartment building as this woman's grandmother, and he ends up being asked by his brother to put the Valentines on his brother's girlfriend's car. He mistakes the car. It's like a very common car. Anyway, and so they go back and forth communicating by leaving little notes and gifts on each other's car, which is, I think, quite cute, and then they eventually meet. And then the third one that I read is Rosie and the Dreamboat. Now this one is by Sally Thorne, first Sally Thorne book I've ever read. I mean, I enjoyed it. It was really random. One sister essentially treats the other sister to a full day at a spa. They end up going into those like sound deprivation chambers. She ends up getting stuck in hers, and she's pretty klutzy. And the romance is with the firefighter that ends up coming to save her. And if you're claustrophobic, this might be a little bit triggering. There are, I think, 6 total, so I have 3 more to read, which I will get to in the month of February. Then I read Siege and Storm, which is the second in the Shadow and Bone trilogy. I preferred this one to the first one. You get introduced to like a lot more interesting characters, and it's interesting. There's like religious fanaticism, there is myth and lore, it's like an interesting fantasy world that's like kind of blending like religion with fantasy together, which I think Leigh Bardugo actually does a pretty good job of that. And then I also read the novella right after that comes actually in between the two of them, but I recommend reading it after the second one because it kind of does give a few hints away. But it is called The Tailor, and it's a chapter, essentially a small novella from the point of view of one of the characters in the first book. It's from Genya's point of view. She is a tailor, and she was in a very unfortunate situation, and you get a chapter from her perspective, which is fascinating. But I definitely recommend reading it actually after the second book because it just feels like there are a few spoilers. Anyway, that is everything that I read for the month of January. Please let me know down below if you read anything interesting. I have plans on finishing up the Shadow and Bone series and then continuing with The Improbable Meet Cute. I also want to immediately read Six of Crows. I've just been like dying to get to that. The reality is I just want to get home and finish reading Throne of Glass, but that won't happen for a little bit. But hopefully when I do my February wrap up, that will be there. And also look forward to my top books of Amazon and Goodreads. There's some really interesting ones there that I don't normally read. There's like nonfiction and literary fiction, contemporary fiction. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. If you've come over from my Lego channel, I'm working on a Lego video. If you've come here to see me read and chat, hello. Please subscribe. I'll see you later. Bye.